and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake LaMore, and this is our monthly episode with the Kankakee County Museum, where we dive into something fascinating about our county's history. And before we welcome Jack and Jorie, just want to talk about some upcoming events happening at the Kankakee County Museum. So February 22nd, there's going to be date night at the museum. And I believe it's going to be New Orleans Princess and the Frog themed, so that'll be fun. There's also the Mantino Book Club with Melanie Holmes on March 29th. That's at 10:30 in the morning. There's also the Rhubarb Festival coming up May 18th. That's the 35th annual. There's obviously always plenty more events happening at the museum. You can always go to KankakeeCountyMuseum.com to find out more about those or follow them on Facebook and Instagram. And I'd like to welcome back Jack Klasey and Jorie Walters to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to you both. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Pleasure to have you here.
Before we start, there's one thing I want to say to all the people who listen and watch. I've heard a lot of feedback from a lot of people about our podcast, and people enjoy listening to us or watching, and enjoy that we go in depth with materials. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who watches and listens. And we have a very good time doing this, and we enjoy it, and we're glad to give you as much information as we have, as we do. And I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jorie.
I'll echo that.
Yes.
And thank you to Jake for letting us do this.
Oh, yes, of course. Absolutely. I get
fun.
Get comments about both of you all the time. I can't say it enough. Almost every time I encounter someone, whether they're like a new listener or a listener that's been here since the beginning, they always tell me like, "Oh, I love the museum episodes." You know, they love Jack and Jorie. So, and I could not agree more.
Wonderful, and we appreciate it.
Yes, we do.
I actually too. I do want to give some accolades. My coworkers Andrew and Drew helped me out last week and filled in for me on the podcast because I was sick with pneumonia. So shout out to those guys for all the hard work they did. So today, there's so many episodes that we could do about manufacturing. Our county still has a ton of manufacturers in it, but it has a rich history of previous manufacturers. And we haven't done any like manufacturers in a while. Or I feel like we have. I know we've talked about the Radke Brewing, which is kind of like manufacturing, right? A little bit. But we're going to dive into what today?
Bear Brand. Pull up our socks.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're talking socks, hosiery, right?
That's right.
If I remember correctly, I could be wrong. I want to say, I think my grandpa Weber actually worked at Bear Brand at one time. But I could be wrong.
Most people have worked at Bear Brand at one time.
Yeah.
And many, for quite a long time, it was the largest employer in the county.
Okay, well, there
Back
you
in
go.
the probably the teens, 20s. In its heyday, the Bear Brand occupied a full block of Kankakee, from Washington Avenue to Bourbonnais Street, West Avenue, and Hickory.
So, wow.
For contemporary residents,
There we go.
where
Aerial photograph.
Jewel and Osco are today on Washington Avenue.
That was going to be my guess.
Yes.
Was that what you were going to tell me?
The big buildings in the middle of that plant, they're 4- and 5-story buildings where they're operating.
So was where Jewel Osco is today and like Paul's Place, that whole block there was?
Yes.
Yes, actually.
Or from there to
from
like
Paul's Place up to Bourbonnais Street, which would be the next street.
Yeah.
The Hickory Street would have run, I think, on the north side of where Paul's Place is. Actually, at that point, it would have been, I think it was a Kankakee foundry or one of the foundries.
Okay. I don't know if this is getting a little bit ahead, but there's no remnants of Bear Brand, is there?
There is
of the
one.
buildings.
There is one.
Okay, there is.
Actually, the Paramount Textile or Pope Brace building on West Avenue at Merchant Street.
So that was part of?
That was part of their operation, yes.
Okay, see, I didn't know that. I thought
and that's
that was
the only remaining part of their operation.
Okay.
They did have, for a while, a building on Broadway in Bradley, plant number 4, I think it was, or something. But the pastor of St. Joseph's Church was given that building and moved it as the first school building for St. Joseph's Church.
Yes. My father went to, his siblings went to St. Joe's. They had Mass in the basement, second floor, and classrooms on the bottom floor. And then that extra building, now this was before the L for that building now for where the school is. And then the extra building was placed right next to the building. It's like in the parking lot now.
And that building, when it was Bear Brand's operation, was where the Manteno Village Hall, the Bradley Village Hall is today, the one section of it that comes right up to Broadway.
Okay. I can piece this together in my mind now. And I had no idea of that. They had such a big footprint. So, and obviously that's what we're about to.
Yeah, and not just
really
in
learn.
Kankakee and Bradley. They had plants in Wisconsin, Indiana. I don't have it offhand, but it was in about 5 or 6 different states that they had plants at one time in the business.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead. I apologize.
No, that's all right.
Okay. He talked about the other building.
Yeah, that's the Pope Brace.
The Pope Brace building,
Right.
which, as Jack stated, still stands today.
Yeah.
It needs a little bit of help,
It does need some help, yes.
but that's what it was.
Yeah, there have been various plans to rehabilitate that and turn it into art studios or condominiums and so forth, but I don't think anything is currently being proposed.
The last I've heard, I don't know if that's completely dead at this point. I know it was halted, but I don't know if that is completely put to bed. I know they still want to do something.
Yes, because it's got a good location for downtown.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Wonderful.
and just the structure of the building as well. Let's go to the beginning then,
Okay.
I guess. Let's go to the beginning of Bear Brand.
Okay.
Talking about
Let's go back all the way to the Civil War. In the 1860s, Dr. William Pope was a physician, I believe, but he invented a knitting machine that could be used to make stockings. And at that time, most clothing was made in the home anyway, sewing and so forth. This would make the housewife make it possible for the family to make their own stockings. So that went on for a while. I don't know how long and how successful it was, but by the 1890s, Dr. William's son, Henry Pope Sr., began producing stockings commercially in Chicago. And I'm not sure exactly where, but for a period of time, he was from probably the later 1890s. And Bear Brand came to Kankakee in 1901, but it wasn't called Bear Brand. Originally, it was called Paramount Knitting Company.
Oh, okay.
And you'll be familiar with the area, and our listeners will be familiar with the area where the first stocking manufacturing operation was. It was in what was called the Teed Shoe Factory.
Mm-hmm.
And that today is the large limestone building south of the river on Water Street at 4th Avenue. It's now has been for a number of years owned by a sheet metal company.
Okay. That's
a big 2-story. It's been fairly recently remodeled. They put new
windows in it. Yeah, I was trying to remember. Gosh darn it! What's the name of the sheet metal company?
LS, I think, or something.
I drive by it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a note with me, but it's
such a cool building. I love driving by that building.
I did a column a number of years ago on all of the miscellaneous uses that building had through the years, including for a good portion of making overalls and women's slacks and things like that. But it was first built as a shoe factory.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, we mentioned that full block and those buildings were built relatively quickly. I think they began building early 1900s is the best date we have, I guess. But by about 1915, they had the entire block filled with buildings.
And that where you're talking about where the sheet metal building is.
Oh no,
right?
I'm sorry. No, I'm jumped ahead. This is the building we looked at the aerial.
This is
the big Bear Brand operation was the one.
So we're back on Washington.
Based on Washington, north of Bourbonnais Street, and it was amazing how large. We have. I've seen another one where a picture looking south on Washington from just north of that factory. And there's a couple of cars going down the street, but you can see how big it is. It was a 5-story building. It was the biggest building.
That's huge.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a big block.
Taller than, they said, the Citibank building downtown.
Yeah, okay.
It was taller than that building.
Okay.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
At that time, that was the tallest building, the City National Bank, what's now the county office building.
Yes.
Because they added to it.
Yeah, so that's pretty tall. So are they making just stockings that they made there, or?
Yeah, they had a variety, everything stockings, but different kinds. For example, originally, the original Bear Brand stocking or Paramount textile stocking was a men's fleece-lined work stocking, and that was kind of the mainstay for a while. But then eventually, they went into casual socks for men, women, and children, and sheer stockings, nylon or whatever, but what we used to call nylons. I don't know if anybody calls them those anymore.
You don't hear it very often, do you?
No. And those were marketed through, I think, a subsidiary of Bear Brand, which was called New Mode Hosiery, that had retail shops in a lot of cities. And that was a very popular item for them. And of course, during World War II, they, I think, got out of that line for a while because everything was being directed to the military rather than that sort of thing.
I have an ad when it was Paramount Knitting for workers,
yes,
mostly women to work good pay and want an ad once a factory of ideal working conditions, need about 7 girls and women for various kinds of work. Good pay, steady work. We could also use a number of men and boys. Work 12 months of the year.
Yeah, the majority of their workers were women and young women, probably as young as 14 or 15 in the earlier days. At one point, there was some activity trying to organize the workforce into union, and an 8-hour day kind of thing, which was not a 12-hour day was more common. Frank Pope was not a fan of that idea, and he managed somehow to, throughout the history of the company, to avoid becoming unionized. Although I think that probably they had a fairly competitive wage at that time because they were, to be able to attract the workers they needed.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I mentioned World War II a little earlier. Like many Kankakee plants, they shifted into military goods. During World War II, they had only one brand of socks, and they were olive drab.
Of course.
And thick, warm stockings because they were dealing with people above the Arctic Circle and that kind of thing, and in Europe and so forth.
So how many people were working at Bear Brand at that time?
I've never seen a specific figure because it did shift from time to time, but it was in the multiple hundreds, probably maybe as many as 500-600 people at a time. Most of that was being machine tenders. I think there's a picture down there, Jorie, of a interior of the plant with a worker monitoring a machine.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking there has to be, I know I've seen pictures of people at the machines.
Yeah, there aren't an awful lot of them, but we have some good ones. I know there is one in that pile. So.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there you are. Okay.
There we go.
Yes, there's
So it looks like a long row almost. I know, do you know what they call those things on the end or on the bottom there? Are those but they look like cylinders?
Yeah, what they are is bobbins, like
They're
a sewing
bobbins,
machine.
okay.
These have the textile, trying to think of the proper term.
Wouldn't be yarn.
Yarn, yes.
Yes.
Okay, there.
Okay.
That's
Looks like
yarn.
things of yarn, yes.
Yeah, yarn, and
A
it was
whole
woven into the sock. There was those are weaving machines.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lady who is standing over one of these machines, and the machine looks to be very, very long,
Oh, yes.
taking up a lot of space.
Yeah, and that was only one of several lines, many lines.
Mm.
At one point in the heyday of this, they were turning out 30,000 stockings a week.
Oh, wow. 30. That's
Just
a lot.
lots and lots of stockings.
This machine was super long, super massive.
Mhm.
So, to make 30,000 a week makes sense by looking at, judging by, and looking at
And
that
that was
picture.
one of several
Right.
of those machines.
Yeah.
Because other activities, in addition to operating the machines, there were inspectors for the socks, there were sock formers and packaging people and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They did a fair amount of advertisements. Again, I think there's another picture down there of the Bear Brand wagon in front of Gelino's store.
See.
Remember, we talked about Gelino's before. Gelino's, this should be a pop quiz.
Yeah, here we go.
Yes,
Gelino's was the store with the lions.
Gelino's.
with the lions originally.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't show in this picture, but they were at the corner of Court and Schuyler.
Yeah.
And
Right,
this
anyone-
picture, which I think goes back to probably the teens or maybe the 20s, is a little hard to tell.
For anybody who remembers where Montgomery Ward was
Yes.
in downtown before it moved a couple blocks away.
Yeah.
This is Gelino's. This is where Montgomery Ward eventually was on the corner.
The southeast corner of Court and Schuyler. And
But Gelino Brothers was there.
half a block south of where we are right now.
So court, and so that would be where there were used to be like a lawyer's office today, right?
And that, well, actually, that's where the library is today.
Oh, it was on
library
that.
is
It was on
today,
that
yeah.
side.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was thinking the opposite.
The opposite side, yeah. That was, yeah, those are currently vacant buildings that used to be a number of different large retail
say
stores on that
about
corner.
this picture. This is a way that advertising was done back in the day of horse and buggy. I believe Radicke had a lot of these. I remember the milk company had things like this that were
Yeah, you had people in costume or uniforms in some cases.
or attached. This is attached. The sign is attached to looks like a vehicle.
Yeah, wagon
Early
of
model
some sort.
vehicle wagon. That you can see all kinds of advertising in downtown of all kinds of businesses, kind of through this method.
It's interesting. In fact, you could probably read them off, Jorie. The names of the stores in Kankakee that carried Bear Brand stockings.
Oh yes, Liqueurs, Chicago store, Connect store,
John G.
Ferris.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sorry too that I can't read because they're cut off from someone standing, a bear standing in front of it, and I
Yes.
can't read it.
A bear for Bear Brand.
Yes.
Yes.
They featured a bear sometimes in their print advertising. Also, I couldn't find one of those offhand to print out.
Looks like Gelino's might be one of the stores.
Oh yeah,
You would
Gelino's
think
was definitely
so.
one of them.
You would think
because
so.
it was the primary department store at that time in downtown.
So yeah, that answered one of my questions is if I wondered if they sold directly to any of the stores locally or if it was more they shuffled out to like the big national stores.
Well, they sold everywhere in the country and even overseas probably, but the Liqueurs was, of course, a woman's clothing store. John G. Necht was a high-level men's clothing
And that's
store.
where Jimmy John's is,
Yes,
where that
right.
parking lot is for Jimmy John's.
Okay.
That building was there.
Right, the corner of East Avenue and Court Street, which when there was an East Avenue coming up to Court Street.
Yes.
My next thought, after showing that picture with someone wearing a bear costume, it looks like.
Two people.
So I'm wondering, was there someone with the last name Bear, or
No.
was I'm just trying to think of like the connection with Bear if that's supposed to, I'm just thinking of their marketing, I guess. I can't help but think if it was supposed to be their product was like tough like a bear, or if it was like warm like a bear, or
in all the reading that I've done relating to this company, I never have seen anything that indicates why they chose the name Bear Brand.
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Been a great mascot.
Yeah. Yeah.
1922 is when they changed their name from originally the Paramount Knitting Company, and then they changed it to the Bear Brand. And at that time, they were the largest family-owned hosiery company in the country.
And it was Pope
family, Henry
family,
Pope Sr.
Okay.
And his son Junior, and I think it was a William, who was a son also.
So then, kind of going from, we were talking about World War II and how they were manufacturing for the troops and things like that. Going from there, like post World War II, what was it like? Did they boom like all the other parts of the city, or was it hard for them to transition back? I
think they did for a while, because the factory was there until the late 1960s. And I think in the post-war years, that's, I think, for example, when new mode hosiery, I remember in the 60s seeing new mode hosiery shops and so forth. I think they did well there. Unfortunately, by 1968, overseas competition, rising production costs, and all the other problems and so forth pretty much caused the company to go out of business.
And that's kind of the trend for manufacturing in general.
That's right.
And we say how the Rust Belt, where we are, the manufacturing core of America, that started to kind of, not just in our area, but that kind of started to disintegrate a little bit at this time. Companies were moving to what was southern states. That was our first
non-union, lower wage states.
Well, especially talking about clothing. I feel like the clothing industry was kind of, that kind of happened to the clothing industry before it did the other industries, right? Because you're telling me 1968, and that's before a lot of the other factories from that era started leaving. Yeah,
and actually, I think we've seen, of course, and we're relatively familiar, a real change in the type of industry we have. In the 40s and 50s, especially the big boom after World War II, most of Kankakee's industry made things, hard goods. They made washing machines, they made tractors, they made ranges, they made building supplies, they made asphalt tile, and still do. That's one of the few of that type of American Home Products, which used to be
Armstrong
is still operating in town. But now the majority of our industries are related to basically the pharmaceutical industry.
That and
food. Look at CSL Bearing and and
that
food.
And food. Yeah,
that's right. Up Urban Farmer and
you got Urban Farmer. There's a couple in Kankakee.
And Silva and what's the other big one in Moments?
Van Drunen.
Yes. And
so actually the county. There's a lot of that.
So much different. You have relatively few producers of hard goods left.
So in 1968, the whole company?
Pretty much so, went down. And some of it I think they may have sold off earlier. But it was a major demolition job. I remember going in.
Here's a picture of that.
Yeah, we got the picture right there.
When was the demolition?
Spring and summer of 1969.
Oh, so they didn't waste any time.
Oh, no, and it was demolished. Yeah, they sold off all the machinery, and once the place was empty, and I've heard somewhere that the construction or the destruction contractor, who was a local one, miscalculated on bidding it, and nearly went bankrupt.
Oh man!
Because so many of the buildings were built with reinforced concrete. Spandrels and so forth, and beams, and he had not counted on it. He was thinking more, I think, more in terms of wooden beams and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And,
oh boy.
So it went on for months at a time, and
So did someone else buy that building and tear it down, or did Bear Brand?
I'm not sure how that was done. I don't have any indication.
I just feel like it's interesting.
I doubt it was Bear Brand. I have the feeling that it was probably somebody purchased the property on a speculation basis.
Jewel? Well, Jewel went in there, but
did Jewel go in there right away?
Oh, yeah, very shortly after that.
Yeah.
Shortly after the land was cleared, the Jewel Osco store was built.
Because I was expecting to hear Bear Brand shut down 1968, then someone else moved in and used the building. Because that's
usually
seeing
the
the
way
pictures,
it's done.
I mean, that place was huge.
Yes, it was.
And I don't know, I feel like it's very rare in our conversations that you hear of some of these factories and manufacturing places to be literally torn down like the year after they shut down. It's like usually the building will stay vacant. It'll sit for a long time if someone takes it or not.
Think of how long the Roper buildings stood, for example, on west of town.
Food Gaines out on the east side of town.
Which is
the big Gaines building. Factory.
The General Foods?
General Foods.
General
Foods.
Yeah.
Right.
It's still sitting there.
It's still an eyesore.
I mean, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, it's actually very shocking
it is.
This didn't have that length of time where it just sat.
Unfortunately, I think in many cases, specialized, very large buildings of that sort are hard to find a market for them.
Right.
Because it's just too massive an operation. What I think has happened in some cases, not necessarily here, but in other parts of the country, is a building like, let's say, Pope Brace building, that size, will be divided up and owned by several other people or purchased by someone at least in portions, and having 3 or 4 different companies involved there.
Yeah.
But when you have an entire block of 4- and 5-story buildings with reinforced floors and so forth, it's pretty hard to find somebody who would want to move in there because it was just too big a job.
Does the museum have any Bear Brand products?
We do have a few in our
few,
collection. Yeah, we do.
So what else about Bear Brand then? Is there anything else in the history before they shut down? That's fascinating.
Yes, in a way. A totally different area. Henry Pope had a daughter, Margaret, young lady. In 1920, she contracted polio. And that, of course, was in the polio epidemics from 20 through the Salk vaccine in the 60s was really a serious problem. Anyway, she was in a Boston hospital being treated, and the next room over was a young New York politician who also was a polio victim named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They became very friendly. They had spent a lot of time next door to each other, and the families themselves. Henry Pope Sr., Margaret's father, became quite a close friend of Franklin Roosevelt. At that time, polio patients, especially those who had problems walking, were fitted with braces, but they were very cumbersome. They were steel, they were heavy, they were extremely uncomfortable, and it took they were all custom made. So it took a long time to trial fittings and modifications, modifications, and so forth. Henry Pope said, we could do some better than that. I think there's a way to do braces that are lighter and more comfortable, not as complicated. They don't have to be made as custom ones. We could actually figure out some of the ways to have the components sitting on the shelf and just put them together when they're needed. And so he went to his Paramount Textile Machinery Company in the building up at Merchant and West Avenue, and a young machinist there named John Klenzak was given the task of saying, okay, make a brace that is light, comfortable, and easy to put together and, change people's lives. He came up with an idea instead of using very heavy steel castings or whatever, machine things, using steel tubing, which was strong, but it was also much, much lighter.
Yeah, it wasn't completely steel. It had
It had a lot of air in the middle.
Yeah.
And so he developed this brace, and through various modifications, he worked with people at the University of Chicago and various other, medical things. And the Klenzak brace went into operation, became probably the most popular piece of orthopedic equipment in history, apparently, at that time. They also did other devices, and eventually a new company called Pope Brace Company was formed and was sited in that building on Merchant.
Mm-hmm. So anything that was going on with Bear Brand or the textile part was completely moved out of that building, and they used it.
Well, the machinery company was still there.
Okay.
But they just added, I think that's when they added additional space in there.
Okay.
The friendship between Henry Pope Sr. and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was more or less permanent. I mean, going back to the 1920s, he was, of course, still working his way up in the ranks of political offices of one kind or another, until eventually, 1932, I think, he became the President of the United States.
Yes.
But earlier than that, he had, after leaving the hospital, he began making regular visits to a spa in Warm Springs, Georgia, for hydrotherapy treatment that really, I guess, his biography said that it was quite helpful to him. We're talking about Roosevelt here, of course.
Yes.
And this went on for a while, but by 1926, this privately owned spa at Warm Springs was in financial trouble. They just couldn't meet their expenses and so forth. Frank Pope and Franklin Delano Roosevelt bought out the business. They bought out the spa and turned it into, with the idea of turning it into a rehabilitation center devoted to polio victims. And later they formed the Warm Springs Foundation, which I think may still exist. I don't know. It's always been, I remember seeing that name from time to time. And it operated the rehabilitation center. After Roosevelt became president, he, of course, was a fairly liberal person. Frank Pope was pretty conservative. He was a sort of your typical Illinois or semi-rural, small-town, small-city entrepreneur, and they tended to be rather conservative. Anyway, he disagreed with many of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal policies, but the two of them never let that hurt their relationship. Until their death, let's see, Henry Pope Sr. died in 1947. I'm trying to think what year that Roosevelt died.
45, wasn't it?
45. I think it was, yeah. Let's say, I remember mentioning that was one
right.
of
It was 45, because both the war and the president, they both ended
at about the same time. That's right.
Year, but he died before the war ended.
So Frank Pope died in 1947, and of course his son Frank Pope Jr. Took over the business and guided it through some very big times, and then finally it died out.
Did the Brace Company die out about the same time Bear Brand did?
It was still run. There was a fellow, and I can't think of his name now, but he was...
Because by that time, we're talking 1968, and that's when Bear Brand went out.
Right.
Didn't they have the vaccine by that time?
I think so. But yeah, they still had, of course, the Pope Brace made devices for other kinds of handicaps and so forth. And I know they went on at least through probably the mid to late 1960s. So I'm not sure what happened from after that. I think the company may have moved to a different location and met with a rather limited specialized market.
Yeah.
Now, Margaret Pope was kind of an amazing young woman. She was 21 years old when she contracted polio. But she became a wife and mother, had 2 daughters. She earned a master's degree from college, and she established schools across the country, various for handicapped children. And through her whole life, she had a long career as an advocate for the handicapped. She traveled all over the country, in fact, all over the world, advocating help for those who are handicapped. She lived until she was 79 years old, and she died in 1980. So, interesting story. I think of
it's very fascinating.
The whole Bear Brand saga is interesting.
Yes,
too.
I had no idea that there was an attachment between the Pope Brace, company and Bear Brand. I did not realize that. I thought they were two separate things.
Yeah, no, they're very intimately involved.
Yeah.
And now that everybody who can see this Pope Brace building that's still standing, you'll know that there's a big, wonderful story behind it.
Yes.
That's right.
It's not just a empty building that's just sitting there with
broken windows.
With broken windows. There's a lot of history attached to it.
Which is another reason, I think, why, there's been many attempts to try and do something with the building. It's just, as you can imagine, it's a very costly thing to do. So
yeah. I'm kind of amazed that when Gas and Wash bought that property, the old
International Harvester.
Yeah, at that time, and then later the Pratt Iron Works.
Yes.
When they tore down that area, I'm surprised they didn't pick up the rest of the block, which included the Pope Brace building and I think one lone house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't pick that up either. But imagine, must have been a cost thing, or maybe they didn't maybe they didn't think they needed all that.
I think part of the reason why buildings are not purchased and fixed up is the cost, because from watching Home and Garden Network, that when you go to remodel or restore, rehab a home, you have to do everything up to code, today's code.
Bring everything up to code.
And that takes a lot of money, because there's been a lot of everything's factored in or grandfathered in if you leave it alone. But if you want to dig beneath, the walls, and you have to really put a lot of money into a building to put it to today's code.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's
and
so
that
many.
Takes so much money.
Well, there's that, and probably the fact, and not just the Pope Brace building, but some of these other buildings downtown, they might be considered historic landmarks.
Yeah.
And that's another thing where there's a list of rules and things that you can and cannot do because it's a historic building or site. And I can't remember if, I wouldn't be surprised if Pope Brace fit into a category of
I don't know. The Kankakee County Historical Preservation Committee, our group, is the people who do that. And that's actually, many years ago, I served on one of those types of committees. And that's the only level of government that actually has some power to stop things, change things. National landmarks, which are rare to come by, have requirements as far as what kind of materials you can use and so forth, but they're not as specific. A city or county preservation commission generally has the oomph to be able to say, no, you can't tear that down, or no, you can't put a neon green aluminum front on that on your house, and so forth.
Well, Bear Brand is no longer, but
yes,
but we have the memories of this once historic factory that employed a lot of people in the city and maybe the county. A lot of people I talked to say remember it, or they worked.
Grandma worked at Bear Brand, right?
Yes, like I said,
somebody knows somebody who worked at Bear Brand.
Yeah, I'm almost positive a few of my grandparents worked there. So,
unfortunately, not saved. But if anybody would like to do more research on it, I have a huge file. We have lots of pictures. Somebody had asked me on Facebook where, can you remember when, of the big Christmas
wreath.
If we had a photograph of it. And I did, and I sent it to this person. He was very happy that we had that, and I could send it. But they had a humongous wreath on their property. But I also want to tell you that the railroad there, these industries back in the day had railroad connections.
Railroad spurs, that's right.
Because they did their offshoot.
Yeah, and they were so close to.
I remember Kraler did, Armor Pharmaceutical did, Bear Brand did.
That's the building across from Mount Grove Cemetery.
The
big.
Yep, that one did.
Yeah, it's paint coatings building now.
Sherwin-Williams
now. Yes. It goes all the way back to many, many different businesses in there.
Right. Well, and I mean, lucky enough, they obviously, I'm sure Bear Brand built where they built because they were right next to the Illinois Central Railroad.
That's right.
And they did, lucky enough for them, they were so close to it that any extension they had to build was very minimal.
Right.
Not like some of these other factories that had to build a little bit more of tracking to get to the actual main line.
That's what we talked about the Illinois Central Railroad before, the importance of the railroad and industry merged a lot at this point in time.
Yes, we were a railroad town.
Yep, and that they could get their goods to market better, quicker. The different railroad lines that we had, a lot of lines going through town that are no longer serviced, but are still there. And they were used for this purpose for the factories.
All right. Well, thank you both, Jack Klasey and Jorie Walters, coming back and talking about Bear Brand. And next time I go to Jewel in Kankakee, I'm going to think about that. Or next time I need to buy some socks.
That's it.
This was fun. So
yes.
Very good. Well, thank you again for having us. We always have a fun time coming and talking about
congratulations on your new studio.
Thank you. Yes, we've been getting compliments, and it's comfy. I like it. So I hope you guys do too. But thank you both so much for being here. KankakeeCountyMuseum.com, of course, Facebook and Instagram. Better yet, you can just go to the Kankakee County Museum, experience it for yourself. I know one of the things that's going on right now, they're completely rehabbing the sports exhibit.
Yes.
They're constantly working on bringing out things from the back room, as we call it, that maybe haven't been out in a long time, or maybe they've never been out before. So they're trying to rotate those things. So if you haven't been to the museum in a while, you might go there now and see something different. Currently, if you're listening to this present day, the French Heritage Museum is closed for the season, I think.
Right.
But it'll be back open.
On
March,
I think, usually.
It's usually March, April, springtime. But you can go there on the weekends. So, in downtown Kankakee. So,
thank you again, as always.
Yes, another old building.
Still standing.
Still standing. Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
That wraps up this episode of Kankakee Podcast. Shout out to Jeff and Rosa Carroll for supporting the show each month through Patreon. If you want your name announced on a future episode, you can sign up at patreon.com/Kankakee Podcast. Special thanks to our sponsors, Chicago Dough Company, Noble Dairy Queen Stores, Frank's Appliance Center and Sleep Source, Pigosh Engineering, King Music, Little Me Studio, Taco John's, D. Westfall Jewelers, Edward Jones Financial Advisor Adam Elroy, Nana's Bakery, Stafari West Avenue, and Pathfinder. As always, thank you for listening to Kankakee Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's fascinated with local history. I'm Jake LaMore. Take care and talk soon.